we just have these two ways of thinking a lot of times. It's either women are really fragile when they're pregnant or when they're postpartum, or the other end, which we've seen a big push for, is the invincible. Well, I was made to do this. And then we've kind of taken away that also the need to proceed with caution. Again, you're not fragile and you're not invincible. And so I'm here trying to preach you are adaptable and you have to be willing to make some of those adaptations because regardless, like your body is changing.
I am so excited about today's podcast because it is featuring a guest that has made a profound impact on my life and the person I am today. This conversation is going to change the way you think about strength, motherhood, and what it takes to reclaim your power after pregnancy. Our guest today is the incredible Brianna Battles, the founder of Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism, a company dedicated to teaching and empowering women about pregnancy and postpartum fitness. Brianna is an expert in bridging the gap between fitness and motherhood, and she's here to share her deep knowledge on how women can train safely, with purpose, and with the confidence to push their limits. Whether you're a mom looking to get back to your fitness routine, a dad looking to support your wife in her journey, or just someone wanting to challenge your own mental and physical boundaries, this episode is packed with insights that will leave you feeling empowered and ready to take on anything. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening. You can also give us up to a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. That's the easiest way to support this podcast. We're pumped to have you. Now, Brianna and I go way back. We go years and years back. We met in California through a mutual friend, Dr. Shante Cofield. And we worked together during my pregnancy and postpartum season, and now again, my second pregnancy season. And you've been a savior to me, seriously, a lifeline. So I'm really excited to have you on here.
Well, thank you for saying that. And yeah, I remember meeting you at Shantae's and just like, you were just so naturally curious about the work that I was doing, even though like that wasn't quite on your life radar yet. And so like you made an impression on me because it's always fun when someone who like doesn't have to care yet actually shows care and interest. And then like, so I don't know, I was really grateful that I got on your radar then and that it's led to a years-long friendship and coaching and all that good stuff.
Very much so. And Brianna was one of the first people that found out I was pregnant because I couldn't wait to reach out to you to be like, what do I do? I'm so nervous.
It is funny being in this role because like I find out before so many husbands do or so many partners do. Like I am the first person to find out. So it makes me feel a little special, not gonna lie.
It is special.
You've always had great coaches. You've like your dad was a coach. Your dad like trained you to like seek out good coaches.
I think it's so important in life, and it's something that we lose track of, and that we need in business and life and in psychology of life, like all of that. We need these guiding forces, and Brianna, you are definitely a guiding force for women. So let's dig into it, shall we?
Yeah.
I would like to hear basically the genesis story of how you created this empire of yours, this Brianna Battles postpartum and pregnancy training. What inspired this?
Yeah, I went to school for like exercise science. I got my master's degree in coaching. So I've always been interested in the fitness and performance side of things. And then I grew up being a female athlete, played water polo, which is very popular in California, not a lot of other places. But I played water polo in college. And so I always had like the athlete identity, but also then the hyper focus and interest in how our bodies work and in performance. So I worked in a lot of different capacities after graduating, from corporate wellness to personal training to coaching Division I, and working with female athletes in a lot of ways. And then it wasn't until I got pregnant with my first son, now 11 years ago, that I realized, oh my God, like the information out there was so gross, was so short-sighted, was so misleading. And I sort of assumed that I was really athletic and fit and had a good background in understanding my body and performance. And so I just sort of assumed, well, like, this isn't really a big deal. Like we were made for this sort of messaging. And ultimately I got rocked postpartum by my birth experience and just how my body felt. And that was really eye-opening because it proved that like fitness isn't enough. Knowledge and prior education in that space was not enough. We needed more specific information to know how to better support female athletes through pregnancy and postpartum. Yet so many of the voices back then social media is very different, but so many of the voices and resources, practitioners, coaches, blogs. I mean, it was just like really focused on, well, if you're fit during pregnancy, you're going to bounce right back. Or it was the narrative of you're really fragile and you shouldn't do a lot. And it's kind of like over. And through my own, I guess, lens of being both a coach and an athlete, and now a mom trying to figure out this new season, I just started connecting a lot of dots and trying to learn as much as I possibly could. So I took my background in strength and conditioning, and I did a lot of different mentorships with different pelvic health professionals, kind of dug into the research, the limited research that there was. And then ultimately what helped create what's turned into something so much bigger than I've ever could have imagined was I started coaching female athletes through pregnancy and postpartum. I left my job in Division I collegiate athletics so that I could try to find a semblance of life balance being a mom, but I still wanted to coach. So I started coaching locally, like a small group training environment. And ultimately, when you coach at like 9 o'clock in the morning, that's going to kind of be a mom's class anyway. So I was working with a lot of pregnant women and new moms. I wanted to create an environment where women didn't have to choose between childcare and their workout, so they could bring their kids to class. And again, this was before that was like a thing, like before we were seeing that, because now we see that like a lot more in different like CrossFit gyms and training facilities that have childcare. But we created that environment. I did that for a long time and eventually brought that business online because so many people were saying, I wish there was something like this where I lived, or I wish I knew this information, or they were asking me questions that I did not, like I wanted to help, but I was like, I am one person. There needs to be like an online course. And again, that was before online courses were even really like a thing, especially within the fitness industry. But I ended up making an online course in, I don't know, 2015, 16-ish, and put that out into the world, followed that up with the postpartum program. And I was doing a lot of that kind of like one-on-one, but ultimately was able to start utilizing whatever resources and people that just felt bad for me and they wanted to help. So kind of accidentally starting an online extension of this business. And I never intended on that. And ultimately what I found was even my programs and resources, online courses were not enough. I needed to connect with the other coaches and practitioners who were this first line of defense for women in their communities. Because it's one thing for me to help the women, but like it'd be so much easier for like a professional that they're already seeking out, that they're already seeing a few days a week at their class or at their, as their trainer or their OBGYN or their physical therapist, to have access to this information and be able to guide. So I ended up creating a coaching certification course for my colleagues, coaches, trainers, practitioners, and it expanded a lot over the years in terms of who's enrolled in it. But I ended up creating that in 2017, right before I had my second son. So I put that out into the world, and that's really, I feel like, what catapulted the brand and business into a much larger landscape, because now we had almost like the B2B and like that element of the business. And that's when I was like, oh my God, I better figure out how to run a business because I'm about to have a baby and I don't know anything about like the tech in the back end. Like I just didn't intend on people. I didn't even believe that people would buy it. I kind of created it because I was so frustrated. And I was just really frustrated with the lack of education, lack of resources, lack of support, how dismissed women are, how misunderstood female athletes are, just a lot of the messaging. So I knew if I could get into the minds of coaches, that was going to be the greatest opportunity for impact. But I didn't even have an email list, like I literally posted on Facebook and was like, I made a thing, like it's just funny to look back on now in terms of how far we've come in terms of like online community, online business. But that, thankfully people saw the value and invested back then. And now we have over 5,000 coaches around the world that are certified as pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coaches. And we've had tens of thousands of women be able to utilize the pregnant athlete training program, postpartum athlete training program, and just feel like they have a better, like more specific support for their interests and identity.
There's so much to unravel there. I mean, that's an amazing story.
I told you I could yap about this.
Well, you're passionate about it.
I mean, the first, where do we start? I mean, the first thing I hear is like, you talked early on about how women are kind of prepped, in a sense, for failure, because it's like you said, it's either they're fragile or you're going to bounce back. And it's like, either way, you're kind of set up because, like, if you go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to bounce back, and then you don't, then you're going, something's wrong with me. And you don't have anyone to bounce these ideas off of. What is a like the biggest misconception that people have about, be it pregnant athletes, or is it postpartum care?
Well, I think a lot of athletes specifically assume if they were fit prior, if they were fit during pregnancy, then their birth is going to be easier and their postpartum recovery is going to be easier. And I say this to everyone, like, fitness will always be a benefit to you in any aspect of life and challenge that you will navigate. Your fitness will always serve as a benefit. It's an incredible foundation. And there are so many variables that influence pregnancy, birth, postpartum recovery, and motherhood that there's just other variables. Like, so fitness is not a guarantee that you will not be unaffected by motherhood, because motherhood will affect you. Every mother struggles with something. We just don't always know what that is. That could be pelvic health symptoms. That could be mental health symptoms. That could be career and identity changes. Like, it is so vast, the variables that influence what their experience will be like. And again, fitness is a benefit, but it does not guarantee one specific outcome. And there's a lot of dogma attached to that messaging. And I think that's a huge thing we have to combat within the fitness community, because we have doctors and coaches saying, well, just keep doing what you've always done. But they're looking more at the physical ability to do so rather than like the long-term considerations of core pelvic health and long-term athletic performance. And that's the angle I come at it from, is it's not just if you can still do it, because an athlete, they can figure it out. They'll find a way to compensate and keep doing the heavy deadlift or the really dynamic movement or run the marathon. They're like, they know how to like tap into that brain, athlete brain. But it's more so that conversation of teaching them, like, can I versus should I? And does this serve me now? Does this serve my ego? Or does this serve like what my long-term athletic performance goals are? And I think it's really hard to zoom out when you're in those seasons of seeing so much change in your body. So our pregnant athletes are desperate to maintain. They're desperate to hold on to what they can. And then after they have the baby, if they are rocked at all, they're also desperate to feel like themselves again. Whether they've had a hard pregnancy and birth experience or a relatively like easy one, either way, their life has changed. And then there's these cultural and societal belief systems and fitness dogma of, well, you shouldn't look like you had a baby, or you should be back to the gym, and almost like as if nothing happened. Yet it's one of the most significant physiological processes that we will ever experience, ever. We have a ton of support for adolescents. We have more awareness around perimenopause and menopause, and that's still not a lot. Yet pregnancy, we act like that's like not really a big deal because we were made to do this. But I mean, women weren't training the way that we are even 15 years ago. Like, our fitness culture for women in general has changed. Nevertheless, on behalf of a pregnant body and a postpartum body wanting to train in this way, this is not aerobics. This is not walking. We are training differently. Therefore, a lot of the messaging and information has to change.
It sounds like there was this great idea born because you were looking for that information and it didn't exist on the level that you wanted it to. So you created it. And I think that's where so many great ideas come in. And you also mention that there was such a lack of information from OBs and like the people that we always go to. Why do you think, even I love my OB, but there was a lack of information on pelvic health from their office? Why do you think that is? It's just not, is it just not in the curriculum?
It's not part of their training, their job and scope, which is incredible, right? It's not my job. They are guiding based on being able to take care of the mom and the baby. They're not trained in fitness or in pelvic health. Our job is to collaborate and refer to one another. They can refer to the pelvic floor PTs for any kind of pelvic health symptoms. And hopefully they have enough information to be able to guide in like really realistic ways, instead of like, well, you're just going to need surgery, or that's just how it is. Because like sometimes that is a lot of the like outdated belief systems, or, there's still that myth of you can't get your heart rate over 140 beats per minute. So they tell a lot of People will just keep your heart rate lower during pregnancy. Like that evidence was overturned almost like a long time ago, between 20 and 30 years. I cannot remember anymore because there's so many outdated things. But again, women are training differently than they were, than even the research has support for. So it can say, well, yeah, exercise is beneficial. We don't need to be convinced of that. We know exercise is beneficial. We have that research, we have that evidence. Now it's looking more specifically, like what kind of exercise are we talking about? And not only is it safe physiologically for mom and baby, but what are the implications on how their body is changing through pregnancy and then the vulnerability of it postpartum? And this is not a popular thing to say, but a postpartum body, in my opinion, tends to be so much more vulnerable in a lot of different ways than a pregnant body. You were recovering from a significant physiological process, growing a baby for 9 months and delivering the baby, however, the baby came out. It's a really big deal. And we don't have systems and resources in place to acknowledge that process and what that rehab and rehabilitation and return to not just performance, but even just basic quality of life so that women aren't experiencing incontinence at, say, 30. And now that's a symptom they live with until they die. Like, no, we need to have better information. It doesn't have to be like that.
It seems to me like it's been this history of just like, I kind of see it as like, if you go 100 years ago, and it's like women would kind of like help each other a little bit here and there, but there are all these symptoms that were just kind of like ignored. But also you're saying like you said, women are different athletes now. They're training differently. And so I see this like you are this light, this beacon of just trying to shine this information out. But at the same time, society is like trying to find it as well. So it's amazing to hear, like you're saying, there's all this information that they're, because I can't think of another phrase, old wives' tales of like, you don't get your heartbeat over 140. You don't drink coffee. All these things that people were like, well, why? And then they did studies and they realized like, oh, we don't, that's just because someone said it,
An outdated theory.
An outdated theory.
Yeah, and so it's like we just have these two ways of thinking a lot of times. It's either women are really fragile when they're pregnant or when they're postpartum. And so then a lot of the messaging and well-intended advice comes through that lens of fragility. Or the other end, which we've seen a big push for, I'd say in the last decade, is the invincible. Well, I was made to do this. Like we've worked hard for women to be able to lift and like this movement of encouraging women to claim their power and step into that and encourage strength and encourage fitness and encourage performance. And then we've kind of taken away that also the need to proceed with caution. Again, you're not fragile and you're not invincible. And so I'm here trying to preach you are adaptable and you have to be willing to make some of those adaptations because regardless, like your body is changing. We don't have these messed up messages about like, tearing your MCL. And it's like, well, it's fine. Like I was able to do this before I tore my MCL. So I'm going to keep doing it. It's like, no, like we understand, okay, I might need to do things a little bit differently while this MCL heals. And then I'm going to have to progress my fitness a little bit while still keeping in the back of my mind that this knee is just still recovering, or it might not totally be the same as it was prior to that injury, but I know my limits. I know how to work around this. I know what I need to do. I know what movements trigger symptoms in my knee. And I know like when I can push it. I know when I've been feeling really good. I know when my strength's been rebuilt. I know that like I have more athletic readiness to push boundaries with this knee and I trust it now. So we have that common sense in the medical field, in the practitioner field, and honestly, in I'd say general population, athletic or not, of understanding orthopedic pain, symptoms, injuries, and managing expectations there. Yet pregnancy, birth, and postpartum are absolutely dismissed. And we either give too much benefit of the doubt or we give way too much caution.
It seems like too many Nike commercials. Too many just do it out there. And it's like, hey, well, also just, take it easy. Take it easy for a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm
like, be adaptable.
Right.
In your training, I'm curious, has there ever been, are there any athletes or people you've trained who have really touched you or kind of changed you through this process?
Yes. Miranda Granger is now a retired UFC fighter. She actually just had her second baby. And that was a really fun experience. Ultimately, she's become one of my best friends through that process. Like we just really connected and hit it off. So yeah, she was like MMA and like I do jujitsu, but I was like still kind of early on in like my own jujitsu process as an athlete when we connected. And I just got to, she just like opened the doors for something that I didn't realize I was so passionate about, which is, working within the combat sports scene. And so I got to go to like the UFC Performance Institute and help her train all through her pregnancy and then returning to the octagon at about 1 year postpartum. So that just felt like a really special case study to be part of. And then our friendship deepened a lot. And it just like unlocked a lot of really cool opportunities and insights, and certainly a lot of growth and learning for me as a coach because, with CrossFit or lifting or running, a lot of the principles I teach can be fairly straightforward and predictable. But in a sport like MMA, like mixed martial arts or jujitsu, striking, like so much of that is reactionary. Um, and also you have to be able to react, you have to be able to adapt. It is so dynamic, it is so unpredictable. And so it really forced in a lot of ways me to like evolve my messaging, evolve my coaching, and like learn as we're going. Cause I'm like, I might not have an answer for X, Y, and Z. Like, where she was fine, fine, fine. And then around 7 months postpartum, she started having symptoms at different points in her training, but it was only during like certain moves, certain takedowns, certain like striking positions. And so then it's making adjustments there at a really high level. And it's not me saying, hey, I'm going to tell you how to like strike. Like that's not my job. As my job is not to tell an MMA athlete how to fight, but my job is to observe her body, understand her symptoms, and then make subtle changes that can improve both her function and experience, but ultimately her performance. And that was a really cool opportunity. And it just, it met my love of jujitsu and MMA with my business and coaching love, and then ultimately created a really special friendship.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I love how you have worked with athletes totally across the gamut from,
Yeah.
an everyday, I would say, athlete to an Olympian and a professional UFC fighter. Like that's a big deal. It's really,
Yeah,
really
it's fun because
cool.
it started with CrossFit because I feel like CrossFit was the world where moms really wanted to claim that title of like pregnant athlete, postpartum athlete. And like I was using that terminology like 11, 12 years ago. Like it's wild to see how that has grown a lot. But I do feel like CrossFit was where we really saw that uptick in people wanting to like hold on to that, CrossFit mom, fit mom vibe. Um, but ultimately, I never wanted to just stay within CrossFit. I, of course, understand CrossFit. I've been part of that community for a long time, just in different capacities. But what I have loved is now being able to work with track and field athletes, with gymnasts, with dancers, with someone who does Pilates, with somebody who does MMA, with a USA volleyball player. Like so many different sports of women pursuing athleticism across this spectrum of interest and ability, whether they just want to be able to lift their stroller without, pelvic pain, or they're trying to make a run for the gold medal and they're on a really tight timeline. And then even like some of our tactical athletes, military, fire, police, where their job, their basic return to duty, they have a lot of different demands on them that is not really well understood or well supported. And they need to go about it in a really strategic way, not just like lose weight to fit into the uniform, but also be able to perform and carry and like lift. Like it's just different. And there's such a disconnect in really understanding what the athlete mom world really encompasses.
What would you recommend for a pregnant or a woman who is expecting to get pregnant and she's not an MMA fighter, not a CrossFitter? Like what tips do you have for them to kind of get started, be it equipment at home or exercise? How would you kind of guide them?
Yeah, and this is like the majority of people, right? But we do see even the moms that are working out at home, they're wanting to do like a hit workout where there is like more intensity involved, like where they might be squatty, but they're maybe doing it kind of quickly, right? So I think a lot of it is being able to take a new and different baseline of like self-awareness and some of your predispositions. So if you are pregnant or you're thinking about getting pregnant, it's getting inventory of, have you had pelvic health symptoms in the past? Okay, like that's just yes, no. sometimes. And many women do. Like many women have, done double unders for years and they always pee whether they've had children or not. That part doesn't matter as much, like in terms of if they've had a baby or not. That's just a symptom that a lot of women experience. Um, and then looking at your tendencies. Are you somebody who's been conditioned to suck in your stomach your entire life? Probably. If you're,
If you're a
I don't
woman.
know, if you're like any adult woman, you probably have. You've just been conditioned to do that. So a lot of women, whether they're like traditionally athletic or not, have a really hypertonic pelvic floor, because when you suck in your stomach, your pelvic floor also grips, and so do your glutes. So it's bringing awareness to that. And then even looking at how you move, being able to understand, like, are you someone who kind of generates a lot of pressure downward into your pelvic floor, out into your midline? Are you holding your breath all the time with every single rep? Are you able to breathe through them a little bit more? Not to get too nerdy, but overall, as your core system changes during pregnancy, there's more demand on that midline. And so a diastasis is absolutely a normal expectation. There's no avoiding that. That's part of just growing a baby.
Can you repeat that for everybody out there that is scared of a diastasis?
Yes. You can't avoid a diastasis, and it's not a problem. It is an adaptation. It is absolutely something you should expect. Your body is incredible, and that is part of that. Being adaptable is accepting that that's how your body adapts to growing a baby, is that midline tissue does not tear. It just spreads. There's connective tissue. That line of your six-pack abs, or your wannabe six-pack abs, like that just expands as you grow a baby. And then after, you have to think about a baby came out of there, there's going to be laxicity there. Your abs might be slightly flared out. That tissue might be squishy and soft still. And it takes a long time for that tissue to remodel and get stronger. So again, all these are normal expectations. And I think diastasis is like the bad guy, but ultimately I like to look at diastasis as the gateway drug of awareness for understanding, like, if you think that, like, you can kind of see what happens to your abs, but the same thing is happening to your pelvic floor, where there's more pressure and more demand being put on the pelvic floor as pregnancy continues. So again, diastasis, that's the thing that like captures attention because everyone looks at abs, and we're afraid a lot of times to have that aesthetic change. And we are so paranoid about that, especially if you're like a fit or health conscious person. But ultimately, I want female athletes and just whatever, like hobbyists, any woman, to understand that like your pelvic health is actually a really big part of this conversation too. Um, and the same thing that's happening with the diastasis is also what's happening with the pelvic floor. You just can't really see it. Sometimes you feel it. That might be pressure. That might be peeing. That might be pain, or just general just discomfort and more awareness of that part of your body, when ultimately none of us have been taught to be aware of that part of our body at all, except for like periods and intimacy. So this is like, it unlocks a whole new, I guess, realm of body awareness. And a lot of athletes, we love to claim that we're like, really, we know how to listen to our body. Like, well, no, you freaking don't. Like, no, you don't. We have not been taught to understand it in this capacity. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is just like true body education.
You hit the nail on the head with that, because you were a D1 athlete. I was a D1 athlete. We go into this season, we think, I know my body, I got this. And then all of a sudden you go, what is this? Why is it feeling this way? And I remember that scariness of the fear of the diastasis was so omnipresent for me. Like, I kept saying it to you and you were like, yes, I understand. And you validated it, but you're like, I'm more concerned about your pelvic health. And I remember you saying that, and I just didn't get it until I went through the process and I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, and I did have a significant diastasis after I gave birth. I had a 4-finger diastasis. I went to a pelvic floor physical therapist at your recommendation, and we worked together to heal it. And so I want to say that because I know how scary it was for me, like all of these changes, physical changes, what that might mean for my identity, and what your messaging is saying, and the education around this subject is so important, because women can be empowered to seek help to heal themselves. And this is a totally normal part of pregnancy and postpartum. But how are we supposed to know that? Because no one talks about it. But now they are talking about it.
Yeah, or it's like accepted as normal, of like, well, that's like just what you're supposed to feel like, or what's gonna happen after you have a baby. Like, no matter how much I'm out here preaching, and like all the people that are so supportive and understanding of this message are like, it's still just part of our culture to assume that like maybe like, oh, your vagina is like a little broken after having a baby, or you're just going to pee a little bit, or there's going to be pressure. And that's just like part of it. Things just change. It's like, okay, maybe things change. And like, there's some stuff that we can do to help with that change. And we are so hyper focused on freaking abs. And I say this as somebody like, I had a very significant diastasis. I understand the like, the mind game that abs and ab changes and loose skin and stretch marks, I get that. And like the vagina is a whole different ballgame. And that's where people need to put their focus and their understanding. So when it's like, hey, so like maybe you can lift 300 pounds, like maybe you shouldn't, because there's so much extra demand on that pelvic floor and on that whole system right now. That does not mean that you're fragile, does not mean that you're weak. That does not mean that you're less of an athlete. It just means like your body is different right now. It requires a different approach to training, and it does not take away from your ability or your identity as an athlete. I mean, again, are we feeding our ego? Probably, we all do. Or are we feeding like our long-term health, which is ultimately when we peel back all the ego and layers, like that's what we all want. Like we want an active, healthy family and a long quality of life. We all know that we're getting older. We all know that we're going to change, that what we look like now in our 30s is not what we're going to look like 20 years from now or 60 years from now. Like we know that, but for some reason we hold so tightly to what was prior to pregnancy and motherhood. And we're so desperate to go back to that version of ourselves that we are it becomes really hard. And a lot of times we are unwilling to just adapt to where we are at right now, because you're like, this, it feels like it's going to be forever. And you're like so freaked out about your body changing, your life changing. What's going to happen with this? What's my birth going to be like? Is my vagina going to be broken? What are my abs going to look like after this? Like you go down this spiral of things that like, yes, it matters. And at the same time, like you will be okay. You will figure it out and you're going to be changing anyway. Again, we logically know that with aging, with longevity, we know that that's what's to come if we're lucky. Yet for some reason, we can't look at our life and our body and our shifts in identity that same way when it comes to motherhood. We resist it.
I know as going through our first birth, I was definitely guilty of some of the stereotypes of just like thinking, oh, this is just a normal process, and not having a full awareness of like what the effects are going to be on Colette mentally and physically. Mm-hmm. What advice, if you could talk to all the dads out there who are soon to be dads, what is it you would want to say to them about this? Because I feel like a lot of these the women who are coming to you, but what about the dads? What would you want to say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky. Like my husband was so supportive after having Kate, because I got rocked. Like, and this was 11 years ago. Like I had an emergency C-section. I couldn't sit up or stand on my own. So like he was having to nurture and take care of me and our baby in a way that like I was just so humiliated by before. I was like, I cannot believe you're having to do this right now. So I say that as a preface to like making your wife and your partner just feel safe and that she is okay, that like you want to help her, that you want to be there, that like you're in it with her, and that like you will just love her unconditionally. And sometimes that might mean like physically taking care of her, which is hard if you identify as like a strong, independent woman. You don't want to be
like no, I know.
Listening to
in like such a vulnerable way. Like I just remember, like he was just he was having to do so much for me, and I was like, I cannot believe he's seeing me in this state right now. Like I'm so gross. I can't, like you just feel so gross. But then being able to, and I think millennial dads are doing an incredible job of this as a generalization, but just being more present as dads, changing the diapers, not putting all of the responsibility on the wife to like do what maybe is traditionally like maternal role. Like I think dads have a huge opportunity to step into a lot of these roles of like, of getting her the support that she needs, of encouraging that, like, hey, I'm going to stay here with the baby. You go out and take a walk by yourself and don't feel bad about that. I want to spend time and bond with this baby, and you need to go get some fresh air and take a lap. You know what I mean? Like, and encourage that, like, because a lot of us will push back and be like, no, it's fine. Like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And like, well, no, you know your wife, you know your partner. Like, you can push back and say, but I really want you to. I want you to go make that appointment with your therapist if you can. I think that's really important. I want you to keep going to physical therapy. I know it's expensive, but like this is a good investment in your health right now. And like that's okay. We will figure it out. Like again, it's just sort of validating the things that are going to support her from the inside out, the mental health, the physical health, the caretaking, making that a shared responsibility. And again, I think overall, like we've seen such a great cultural shift in how dads are showing up for their kids. So I think it's great, but I think it's more of the affirmation to our strong, independent partners that don't like a lot of help or feel weak. And it's affirming that like you are there to take that weight away in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think Colette and I both teared up a little bit when you shared your story. I don't know if it's the pregnancy hormones rubbing off a little bit.
I think it's relatable. I think it's so damn relatable of you have this identity of who you are and you have built that your whole life and you love those parts of yourself and they're wonderful. And then all of a sudden you get rocked and all of those parts you wonder, now they're still there underneath, but you can't see them in that moment because there's just too much other stuff going on. I mean, you're changing other diapers, but like you're also changing your own diaper. That is humbling, to say the least.
Like you start, and it's like in the beginning, you guys kind of get to live like you're living your life together, but you're also independent. And then there's this like forced bonding that comes through parenthood at a much deeper and more vulnerable level. Like I just it's burned into my brain and I know that maybe it's TMI, but like I just remember like when I went to the bathroom, like I couldn't even bend to like reach down and like pee by myself to like know if I could. And I'm like looking and my boobs are huge. And I have this incision and these like little steri strips. And I'm just like, and I just feel giant and I'm swollen and my belly button looks all weird. And he's like wiping my leg, because like then you're bleeding still. And you're just like, what is even happening down here? I can't see, I can't bend over. Like it's just you go from being so athletic and independent to you're like, cool, I can't even like reach to like go pee. That's cool. So it's so freaking humbling. And then knowing that like you can be loved through some of your like ugliest seasons of how you feel and look and like your own perception of self, even if like they're like, you're beautiful and it's okay. You're like, no, man, I am ugly right now. And just being able to hang in there with them. And then also like that doesn't go away either. I think motherhood fundamentally changed my brain chemistry. And I've just like I think we just continually need that affirmation that like you're not washed up, you're not gross, you're not ugly, you're still pretty, you're still desirable, like you're still who you are, and you're a mother. So that makes it even better. And like that is a message I think we need forever. And I think is easy to dismiss.
I'm curious as to like, we've been having babies for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Are there any things that maybe, and I don't know, are there any things like in the past cultures and histories that kind of helped women through this hard time? Because what I see is what we're doing now, we're saying, okay, like we said, go take a walk by yourself, go, take some self-care and everything. Hundreds of years ago, like what were some traditions that went on that kind of helped women through this? And I don't know. I'm just curious if you've researched that.
I think in community, like the first thing that comes to my mind is that like in other cultures and just in general, like there was just more community. Like we had parents that lived closer, we had siblings and just a greater family unit, extensive family unit, neighbors, friends, and family. And we've turned into such an independent society of like, well, it's just my family. And like, well, the nuclear family is, of course, to be like loved and protected and supported, and we can make our own, traditions and values. I mean, the experience of having support is we are so desperate for that. And people don't have it for a variety of reasons. Either A, they're like, they don't want to accept help. B, they have, they don't have that access. They don't have the ability to have that relationship or that close in location to family. we've lost the ability to make friends and nurture relationships. And I feel like I've seen that a lot in terms of, or even when you're getting pregnant, like we had babies before a lot of our friends did. And so it was really lonely. Like I felt like we were the first ones to navigate this and I was figuring it all out. And now like all these years later, I have a lot of friends that are like having babies right now. And I'm like, okay, I'm like the I'm like the older, wiser, like auntie without even being much older, but like it, we just had kids a little bit younger. So again, having people who have been there and get that and then being willing to accept that help, seek out that help and not feel like it makes you less of a mom. I mean, and then I think just really creating relationships. And it's hard because I mean, Colette, like there's so much eh, finding mom friends is really hard because there's so many rigid, strong, dogmatic opinions that there's not a whole lot of like you do you. It's like almost like very conditional, especially in like the early years of motherhood, because people are so that's like what they attach themselves to is like who they think they are as a mom. And so then that presents with a lot of like not a lot of grace for having an open mind and having connections and building a community and making friends because people are so freaking rigid and kind of mean with their belief systems. And I think we have to kind of go back to a way of like, hey, you do you. Like, I don't care what you do with your baby. I enjoy your company though. Our kids are the same age. They can play together. Like, it doesn't have to be your best friend, but ultimately, like, having just support and someone that can show up for you. I mean, it's knowing how to still be a friend and put yourself in a position to make friends as a mom because it's really hard. It's really easy, I should say, to isolate. It's very hard to be willing to like seek out and develop new relationships and friendships. And I say that. I mean, I hate it. I absolutely am like, please no, I don't want new friends. But and like we moved to another state a few years ago, and like that really opened up the need of establishing a community and creating friendships and now I look at that I'm like I wish I would have had this mindset when I was a new mom. Yeah, the mindset I'm stepping into now when we moved out of state, we were truly forced to create a whole new community. I wish I would have had that open-mindedness as a mom, a new mom, and it probably would have made a big difference.
I know we relate to that a lot, and it is something you see in society. It's just like there's the lack of community and the lack of nurturing. I can think about our neighborhood, which is an amazing little, awesome neighborhood. The whole town is great. However, just with technology and everything, like there's this really tight, like small section of the town that we live in, and there's a text group and everything. And when someone's born, oh, congratulations. And it makes me think like, oh, people should be reaching out physically more often. And I know we're guilty of it, of just being like, oh, congrats, whatever that might be. But yeah, and it's difficult. You really have to take this active approach because I feel like society has just through progression and, technology, whatever, limits those interactions. Like now as a society, I feel like our generation is going, okay, we need these organic interactions. We need to be getting out, and it does take an effort. And I think we've changed this mindset because, we're in the same situation where we've moved and we're trying to make a community, but it's still tough. It's very tough to get out and I love how you had that idea of like, you need to have this open mindset because we are very rigid in our beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes it really like isolating. And, fortunately, where we moved to, it's very much a transplant community. So a lot of people are moving here with the same desire to create community and friendship. So whether that's joining a gym or your church or making a friend through your kids at their school, like finding somebody and then like being willing. And it's funny because like I'm not really extroverted, but one like hack I tell everyone is like find yourself an extrovert friend and like then they're gonna plug you in. So like I feel like my best hack is like just attach yourself to an extrovert and like they will help facilitate these things. But then it's being willing to like say yes and show up and like do things that you're putting yourself in a social environment where maybe after your CrossFit class or after like for me like jujitsu, like going there, being able to make friends and then saying like, well, you guys what are you guys doing Saturday night? You want to like come over, we can do this or do that and just you have to be willing to shoot your shot just like you would if you were trying to date. It's like the same thing. And ultimately but you're setting your kids up as well. Like this isn't just like your own selfish wish. It's like being able to raise my boys with friends that they can grow up with is so special. It is so special seeing these kids that they are getting to know from very young ages in elementary school that they're likely going to be able to grow up with this whole time. Like, and that's special. And that's because the parents have kind of stuck together and said, like, we're going to create a community here. And again, I wish that's something that we would have had access to, or I would have had that thought towards when I was in the stages of like being a new mom. But I was very much of the mindset of like, well, I have my friend group, but my friends didn't have babies. So it's like they were being raised by, their aunties and uncles, but like there was no kids for them to like grow up with. We just didn't have that. And it wasn't in my mind to seek that out. But when I think about what can really improve the quality of life for families and parents and just the motherhood experience, it's having support, it's having community, it's having other women and families that know how to show up for you. We don't show up for each other well. And I think it takes a lot of life experience to learn how to be the friend that shows up. And that's given to you in return.
Now you've talked about how you're kind of out of the trenches now.
Yeah.
And you always see it on social media, or you'll even hear it in person, like just wait until, they wake you up at night, or like all the negative stuff, just waits. And I despise those, but I can't help but think of like all of the amazing, positive just waits that you have gone through. And so as a mom that's out of the trenches, as an athlete mom that's out of the trenches, what like awesome just waits or do moms in the trenches of babyhood have to look forward to?
That's the thing. It's so many, and you can't see it when you're just like wiping butts, including your own. Like you're just like when you're just like your own hot mess season of life, and you're not sleeping, and your workouts revolve around nap time, and then nap time gets ruined, and then you don't work out, and then you just feel gross. Like, and you're just in this perpetual cycle of unpredictability. I think one of the great things as they get older is just having more predictability, where you're like, oh my god, like they're in preschool or like they go to school a little bit. So that means I can actually go to that 10 a.m. class on these days and like commit to that time because it's not in the middle of nap time. It's not in the middle of like baby doing this and interrupting my workout or whatever. Like, so I think you just get to reclaim a lot of your independence that has been paused or has looked so different for a long period of time. And that opportunity of independence is what kind of unlocks your ability to be like, all right, maybe I can train for that half marathon or that triathlon or do that CrossFit competition or start jujitsu. Like that's what it was for me. It was like I finally had a little bit of opportunity there, which I did not have for years. And then it's nice to not be as needed. Now I'm certainly needed in different ways now, but like they're not dependent on my boobs for their existence, and like that is so nice. It is so nice that like my body is just my own again. Um, so that's all really special is just being able to have that independence and like reclaim yourself a little bit and then be able to say like, I can do X, Y, and Z. And maybe that's, I can excel more. I can put more into my career, into my business now because I have more opportunity to. So I think on that side of things is really cool. And then on the parenthood side of things, you're sleeping more. That's really nice. You have predictable, you can like stay up later. You can like wake up earlier and you're not totally getting sabotaged by sleep interruptions all the time. And my favorite part when I'm in it right now is I call it like my sports mom era. And my boys have been playing sports for a long time. Like they started at like 4 with jujitsu and soccer and all those things. But now, Kate is 11, Chance is 7, and we're in sports and practice and game seasons pretty much like year round. They go from football and flag football into basketball into baseball and then jujitsu all throughout that. And it's so fun raising little athletes and being able to like not be a coach and not be the athlete, but to be the mom and experience sports through that lens and like supporting them and loving them through it. But then having that like special insight as a coach and a mom to then really be able to have such a deep appreciation for witnessing their own journey in sports and being able to guide that. Like this is where I'm like, okay, I finally feel like a real mom. Like I really like this part I got this part. I didn't understand like all of the other stuff when they were like little, like the little kid season was really hard for me. I never felt like I was doing a good job. I was like, oh my God, this is just like, I'm like not enjoying this as much. And I felt a lot of guilt for that when they were really, really little is because it just felt so hard. But now I'm like loving it. It's so fun seeing their little personalities develop and surprise you and things that like you remember who they were as babies and you're like, God, it makes so much sense now seeing him like at 11, like, okay, your personality absolutely checks out because that's exactly how you were as a baby. And then like same on the other end of the spectrum. It's just like really fun to just, you're really getting to witness your child come into their own and who they are. And like you see the pieces you've contributed, and then you just see their God-given abilities and personalities. And it's so special. And like the sports element just is is just really been cool for me, with my background in coaching and being an athlete, and now seeing them get to experience all those emotions and then help guide it. Like it's really fun.
Have they ever like kind of like talked back or like been like, ugh, mom, whenever you're trying to like use your expertise in coaching and you're like, I know better, but I guess you're not going to listen right now.
Yeah, and that's one thing, like, when you've been an athlete and when you're a coach, you know how annoying parents are, and you're like, you don't wanna contribute to the toxic parenting culture because you see it, you hear it, and you're, like, sitting around it, and you're like, "Oh my god." So it literally puts me in check where I'm like, I do not wanna ever sound like that guy who's yapping in the bleachers or who's, like, talking to their kid after the game. So for the most part, like, Cade's 11, so he's, like, more in that competitive, and he's like a very intense, very athletic and gifted kid. So he feels the feels really intensely with winning and losing. So I know like just basically to shut up. Like we don't talk after games. Like if there's a bad game, or if you have bad performance, like we just don't talk. And then when he's ready to talk, or if he's interested pre-game or post-game, I approach him with, "Do you want me to talk to you like a mom right now, or do you want me to talk to you like a coach right now?" And I let him choose. And that's been something I've done with him since he was maybe 5 years old, because he's just like wired so intensely, and then plus like there's plenty of stuff within sports that I don't know. Like I don't know football strategies. I'm not giving advice on that, but I can give him advice on how to show up and be a good teammate, how to be respectful with their coaches and stuff like that, and like check the attitude, check your energy. Like your energy sucks on the field. Like, and I can say that because if you're like head down and pouty like that, that gives off bad energy to your coaches, to the refs, to the other players. So we're going to check that. And so you're teaching them how to conduct themselves in those capacities, and that's the lens I try to come into when it comes to going to like coach mom brain, is more so like how are you presenting yourself as a player? And you start to see too, as they get more involved in sports, as they get a little bit older, you start to see some of these tendencies with other players. And I just know like what it's going to take to, whether he goes on and plays at any higher level or not, it's more so what is this instilling in him now? Like sports are such an opportunity to instill like a good value system and how they conduct themselves and behave themselves, in those like stressful situations where it's all on them or it's all on this team and there's highs and lows. It's a great way to learn for like to be a parent, and you're teaching it through this vessel that's not just telling them or sharing your own story. It's like in the moment guidance that isn't directly connected to you, but it's connected enough. And as simple as like, hey, after every single game and after every single practice, you thank your coaches, you thank your refs, and you offer to help clean up, period. And it's really cool. This is such a small example, but like I don't really have to tell him that anymore. I don't really have to for a while. Yes, I was like, "Did you think your coaches?" And like, I still will sometimes, just to double check.
Just a mom.
Yeah, like right. But that is a lot. Even that, it's so simple, but it is a lost art
I can
for
remember
being
doing
that.
that.
I can remember
And
doing
I don't
that
I don't
too.
know where I learned it, but I can always remember doing that. And it was
My
kind of
dad
like
taught me that.
somewhat of like an anomaly at times too, because people would just be like, "Oh, well, thank you."
And shake their hand. Like
Yeah.
go up, shake their hand, look them in the eye, and thank them.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, I observe this because I'm like I look for the weird things. I'm that mom, but like you don't see that. It's not really common anymore. But that opens up an opportunity for him to establish good relationships in our community with the refs, with these coaches that are going to keep watching him play in all different sports. Like again, it's just how you show up, how you present yourself, and especially as a really intense and athletic kid, I'm like, you better like you got to contribute to the positivity of your character and how you're representing yourself. And
Yeah, it's not just the performance.
Yeah,
It's how
no,
you
it's,
show up for
it's
everybody.
literally learning how to be a successful, high achieving human, and we can use sports as a vessel to do that. And I think that we know that, But I think we forget how to actually implement that as parents, and sports provide such a great opportunity for that. And you start to see, the older they get, you just start to see that disconnect happen. Again, he's still in elementary school, and I look around the different teams he plays on, the different dynamics of the teams and the kids and the parents, and just the sport culture that he may be in. And you just start to notice like how little things are actually going to be the biggest things.
It also kind of instills this idea of like, no matter how good you are, like we're all part of this community. We're all part of this. Like you need to be respectful. Like, and prima donnas, we've all played sports with them, and nobody wants to be around them. But the people who are respectful, even if they're good or not good, it's like we want to be good friends and good people. So
well, I can see that postpartum adaptability is paying off in your sports mom era.
Oh yeah, well, and it's fun too, and like they get to. I think what's different between like our lifestyle now and say how like I was raised was, my mom like wasn't really, she wasn't like an athlete. She wasn't even exercising. Like she was just trying to survive raising my sister and I. But like now my boys see how normal it is to train and to still compete. And like to them, that is normal. It is not normal still in our society. It's not normal like that their mom like goes and like wrestles dudes, like
and that their grandma deadlifts. How much does your mom deadlift?
Grandma's a baddie and she does CrossFit, and like we have a bunch of kids on our street, and like so they all see that it is normal to push a sled around in our household. Like it is normal for parents to still train and parents to still compete and parents to like not just prioritize, oh, I eat salads every day. No, it's like we are training and respecting our bodies, and like athleticism doesn't end. It will look different. It will look different. Your body will change. Your life will change. Your interests will change. All of these things will change. But like the fundamentals of being an athlete, that doesn't have to go away just because you become a parent. And it's really cool seeing that I'm not just telling them how to be athletes. That is what they have seen Jared and I exemplify from day one. Like they know that it is just part of what we do is we train. We go to jiu-jitsu, sometimes we compete, and that's just normal to them. And that's ultimately and then now our neighbors can see that. Maybe their parents aren't doing exactly that, but they see that is something that you can do. That is a way that you can live your life. And you just never know how you're kind of influencing this next generation.
Well, Brianna, this has been amazing. How can people find you online?
Yes, well, go to my website. It's the pregnantandpostpartumathlete.com, and I have a lot of resources there for pregnant and postpartum athletes, as well as the certification program for coaches and practitioners. I have a podcast, the Practice Brave podcast, and then on Instagram, it's at Brianna, Brianna.battles, and then the brand Instagram account is at pregnant.postpartum.athlete. You'll be able to find everything there, and thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. I know we could talk for hours about all things life and sports.
Subjects.
And I know we want to have you back to talk more. This has been so amazing. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram and TikTok. These are great free ways to support this podcast. Also, please subscribe to this podcast on both Spotify and Apple. On both of those platforms, you can leave us up to a 5-star review, which would help us out greatly. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned in today's episode. That's the best way to support this show. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please put those in the comment sections in YouTube. And yes, we do read all the comments.